From the time I was a kid, I was always captivated by wetlands. You know, swamps and marshes and stuff. They're like little living pockets of rot on the Earth's surface, and I have a morbid curiosity towards them. So I'd been planning this little road trip to the manor of Pond Mills. Hectares upon hectares of wetlands on a property of this old stone manor from the 1800s. It was now a bit of a heritage site, and the manor was functioning as an inn. There were tons of different boardwalk trails around the manor, and they all looked exquisitely beautiful in photos. The food was supposed to be pretty good too. In the 1800s, the manor had belonged to the Preston family. It was very remote, and they had been self-sufficient, farming the bit of good land, although the house was nearly surrounded by wetlands. They had built the house themselves and lived there for 6 generations. During the Second World War, it had been commandeered and used as a fort, and for 40 years it was owned by the government. The Preston family was compensated and relocated, and then in the 80s the government sold it off as a tourist attraction. The drive into the manor was a gravel road flanked on either side by swamp. I was already in love. The giant trees uprooted out of the water, massive spaces between them. I wonder if they have boat rentals, I thought to myself. Whoa, my car almost drove off the road as I wasn't paying attention. It was an extremely narrow road, and I really needed to keep my wits about me if I didn't want to end up upside down in the water. Oh, great. Another car was coming from the other direction, and I nervously tried to make as much space as I could, driving with my right wheels less than a foot away from the water's edge. The fit was narrow, but we both made it. I felt like the car was almost tilting into the water, and I centered myself on the road as soon as the car passed. There was a splashing noise behind me that I examined in the rearview mirror. I watched a chunk of the road where I had just been driving erode and fall into the water. Oh my god, I'll have to report that to them. I thought that was strange since the water wasn't moving, so why would there be erosion? But the gravel looked pretty worn down too. Perhaps this was the original road from 200 years ago. The drive to the manor was surprisingly long, but I enjoyed every moment of it, and when I finally arrived, the manor looked impressive, but a little more grim than I was anticipating. The stone looked worn and untextured, and the roof was a green copper. For some reason I was expecting it to look like a castle, but it looked more just like a creepy old house. There was a lick of ivy growing up the side, which I appreciated. I parked and got out. The desk staff was very friendly. I warned them about the driveway, and they said they'd send someone out to take a look. They were very apologetic about the whole thing. I was shown up to my room. Seeing as we were on a peninsula, I was pretty sure I was going to have a good view of the swamp, and I was right, especially because I was on the 3rd and highest floor. I had a long, narrowish room with 2 weathered large windows. On the far wall from the door was a comfy-looking Victorian-style bed with a lovely carved wooden frame, and across from the bed by the door was a large mirror. I unpacked and went downstairs to eat. The reviews were right. The food was very good. I had a long day of boardwalks planned for tomorrow, and I made my way up to my room to sleep. In the middle of the night, I heard singing echoing into my room from outside. I tried to ignore it, but it was irritating and it wouldn't relent. The voice was female, but the vocals actually sounded too good for her to be drunk. I checked my phone. It was 1:02 in the morning. I got out of bed and made my way to the window to give the woman a piece of my mind. It smelled beautiful as I unrolled it, but as I looked down onto the freshly cut grass, I saw no one. The haunting melody simply wafted through the air, and I couldn't get a sense of where the sound was coming from. Then, about 100 meters away, behind a tree in the middle of the swamp, I saw a strange light. It was a woman, wearing a dirty yellow gown, holding a lantern, gliding along the water. The way she moved almost made it look like she was standing in an invisible gondola. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It seemed impossible for a sound this loud to be produced by someone so far away. And yet somehow I knew that this song, ringing in my head and reverberating across the swamp, was coming from her. She turned to look at me, and it became very clear that her mouth wasn't even moving, and yet, somehow, I still knew that it was her singing. A feeling of doom washed over me, and I ducked down beneath the window. The moment she looked at me, I felt this horrible feeling growing in the pit of my stomach, and it wasn't going away. It still felt like here, behind the window's ledge, she was able to watch me. I reached up to close the window, not wanting to reveal my face again. Closing it somewhat quelled the feeling in my stomach and the ringing in my ears. I lay back in bed, wondering if what I had just seen was a ghost. I wondered if this had been her room. A part of my mind was still trying to calm itself down, telling me that in fact someone was on a gondola, drifting through the swamp in the night, and if they wanted to get me, they'd have to come up through the front door of the hotel. My door was locked, I was sure of that. There was likely a logical explanation for what I'd seen and heard, right? I tried to get back to sleep, but I couldn't. I felt a mix of frustration and fear as my mind danced between the paranormal and the logical was now interfering with my morning plans if I didn't get enough sleep. After about half an hour, the singing finally became inaudibly quiet, and I assumed she must have drifted away. It felt like what must have been 2 hours passed since I woke up, and I still couldn't sleep. I checked my phone again, and it read 1:03 a.m. No, that's not possible. 1 minute has passed? My blood went cold as suddenly I felt that someone was right behind me as I lay on my side in bed. I had this sensation that if I turned around it would kill me. Instead, I moved forward out of the bed and started walking towards my door. My plan, well, I didn't really have one. I just knew I needed to get out of that room, head down to the lobby maybe, and ask about the woman I'd seen. Maybe the bar was still open. Maybe there was a friendly face I could talk to. Before I could get halfway to my door, I noticed something odd. My reflection in the mirror was approaching me, and it wasn't me. It was the woman, wearing a dirty yellow dress and holding a lantern. I stopped dead in my tracks, with heart pounding. She looked emaciated and had a stern look on her face. She walked right up to the mirror and lifted the arm that wasn't holding the lantern to beckon to me. I heard a breathing sound as though it had come from right behind my left ear. I gasped and whirled around, but saw nothing there. As I looked back towards the mirror, I realized turning around had been a mistake. Her arm was freakishly long, reaching out of the mirror into the real world, and her index finger penetrated my chest cavity before I could even move or react. I was frozen. It felt like an ice-cold liquid was flowing into my lungs and suffocating me. I don't really remember what happened next because I think I must have passed out. I woke up on the floor of my room in the daylight. My heart was racing like I thought it was going to explode. My chest still felt cool, and I ripped off my PJ shirt. There was a strange pattern of blue veins on my chest. I ran to the bathroom to look at it in the mirror. I didn't trust the old mirror by the door anymore. The veins on my chest appeared to form what looked like a map. I recognized some of the terrain. It was the system of boardwalks around the manor I had been studying on my guide map over the last couple days. I felt like I was going to be sick. All I wanted to do was just get in my car and go home, and yet I just knew that these veins were not going to go away on their own. There must have been something the ghost wanted me to see there. She could have easily killed me last night if she wanted to, or at least I imagined so. I got out my maps and examined them. There was a line of veins on my chest that was not congruent with them. The line led to a round clump of veins that seemed to pulsate unlike the others. I figured that this was the spot I was to venture to. I marked it down on my paper map and got ready to leave, giving the door mirror one last frightened glance as I passed it by. At the desk, I asked the woman if she knew what the location on my map was. She told me she didn't, but she couldn't recommend that I leave the boardwalks because it might not be safe to go mucking around on soft ground surrounded by marsh and swamp. I asked her if she knew of any hauntings in the manor, and she laughed and told me she hadn't heard of any. I thought that was odd. You would expect a place like this to be crawling with ghost stories. I wondered if anyone else on any other floors on my side of the building had seen what I saw last night, but I pressed on into the outdoors. It was a foggy morning, and the boardwalks were breathtaking. Unfortunately, I couldn't enjoy them to the fullest because of the anxiety over what happened last night and whatever was to come next, crossing over the dark mire into another murky unknown. And at last I came to the crossroads on my map where the line of veins suggested I proceed. But I couldn't see anything in the real world that looked like a path. It was just a shallow brush forest with a moderate bluff of dirt beyond. The ghostly singing started up again, and out of the corner of my eye I saw the white lady float out of view behind a tree in the shallow forest. I swallowed my fear and proceeded in that direction. I hadn't seen a single other person on the trails. It was too early in the morning and too foggy. No one saw me go off the path. I wondered if these were my last moments alive. I continued to follow the singing, as uncomfortable as I was, and continued to traipse into the vast wilderness. After about half an hour, I saw a man-made structure. It started at the hilt of the dirt bluff and wrapped around to the shore of the swamp. It looked so worn, nearly completely disassembled. A cast iron spike fence, and within its boundary it unhoused what appeared to be several graves, marked mostly by small stone crosses. Most of them made of the same weathered stone the manor appeared to have been constructed from. Only a few remained standing upright, and many were chipped. It smelled like some sort of animal urine. But before I could explore that any further, I heard a splash on the far side of the yard, where land once again became swamp on this small island. I hesitantly made my way over, bracing myself and preparing to run. A splash sounded again, and I realized it was dirt eroding into the swamp. A tomb-marking cross sat half in the water and barely clinging on to the muddy bank. I peered at it more diligently. It read, "Here lies Ellen Preston, beloved daughter of Alfred." The wind blew, and my eyes were drawn out into the swamp, where I now saw a worn wooden box, a coffin, floating next to some cattails. Oh my god. I realized that this is what I was supposed to do. I got out my phone to dial for help, but there was no service out here. There was no way I was wading into a swamp to retrieve a coffin. I turned to go back to the front desk to get help, but as I did so, the fog got even thicker. There was a whirring and hissing around me, and the singing started up again. I called out into the void, "I know! I'm going to get help! I'm getting you help!" The throbbing in my chest was becoming too much to bear. The lady must not have trusted me, and I realized I was going to have to wade in to get that coffin after all. I stripped down to my boxers and stepped through the mud. The water was freezing, and I swam over as quickly as I could while dog paddling. I just wanted to get this over with. The swamp was deeper than I thought. I actually could just barely touch the bottom, but everything about this situation still felt very wrong. Then, something grabbed hold of my foot, and in that brief moment, I thought it was the arm of the ghost. Had she lured me out here just to drown me? I panicked and kicked it away, then realized it must have just been some growth. I grabbed hold of the corners of the coffin and began whip-kicking my way back to shore. The wood was incredibly ragged, and I got a splinter in my right index finger, but I kept going. I made it halfway back, then 3/4 of the way, and then at last I was back on the shore. It took a lot trying to pull it back onto land. I lifted with my legs and pulled up, but the mud slipped out from underneath me and the coffin landed on top of me. Oh my god, I got out of there. I tried again, sliding it up the muddy bank, and at last made it back onto the plateau. The singing and the fog quieted, and I looked around for something to dig with. To my luck, there was a rusted old shovel propped up against the crux of a split tree. A chunk of the blade was missing, but there was enough that it was useful. I dug a new grave for the coffin in a spot that looked clear. Through the lid of the coffin, I could see the remains, mostly bones, but arguably with a bit of grey skin on top. Sure enough, the skull looked female. I buried the coffin and propped up the gravestone upright to the best of my ability, and the throbbing in my chest went away. I looked down to see that indeed my task was accomplished. I checked out of the manor early though, and drove back home right away. That event sort of ruined swamps for me forever. But now, with some time behind me, I'm at least glad that a restless soul was laid to rest. Thanks for listening, guys. For more stories on Thursdays, subscribe and hit the bell, and tune in on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. You can also submit your nightmares to theforgottengrove@gmail.com, and I'd love to read them on the air with you. Until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.